Good morning, everyone. Hello, I am Blair Taylor. I'm CEO of Tennesseans for Quality Early Education, and I am delighted to welcome all of you to our webinar this morning, featuring Penny Schwinn, Commissioner for Tennessee's Department of Education. Good morning and welcome, Commissioner Schwinn. Good to have you with us today.
Nice to be here.
So just a quick bit of procedural housekeeping kind of things. The session's going to go about an hour. At the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. If you do have a question at any time during the discussion, please put it in the chat and I'll try to address as many of those questions as we can. And for those that we can't get to on the call, we'll do our best to get answers and respond within the next 24 to 48 hours or so. As you know, our topic today is a package of education-related legislation that's championed by our governor, Bill Lee. It's the focus of a special legislative session that our Tennessee General Assembly will actually begin tomorrow. Before we jump in though to the discussion on those bills with the Commissioner, I just wanted to acknowledge today's national holiday commemorating the life and the work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I just like to welcome you into this conversation, both as a time for reflection on inequity in early education in our state and as preparation for advocacy on behalf of Tennessee's youngest learners, particularly children of color, economically disadvantaged children, including those in Tennessee's at-risk and distressed rural counties and all historically underserved children in Tennessee. So now just for a brief bit of context for this legislation, Commissioner, you and the governor have recently highlighted that prior to the pandemic, only about a third of Tennessee's third graders were proficient in reading and math. And Jonathan, if you'd put up that slide, that'd be great. And yet we anticipate that due to interruptions of the pandemic, many of these children may have fallen further behind. So could you just comment why third grade is such an especially important milestone year? And then what's being predicted in terms of further learning loss due to the pandemic?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think this slide really captures both where we are as a state, but frankly, how hard it is to teach a child to read. It is very hard to do, certainly hard to do in person. I think it's been harder to do during the pandemic with all of the changes and challenges, remote, in-person, back and forth that folks have been having. Where we are as a state, you see that third grade line in red, we were just at about 50% for third grade. We're now hovering right around that 37% mark. And that is specifically looking at third grade proficiency on the ELA TCAP. Eighth grade has gone from about 50% and now we're at 27%. And what we have found is that students who are proficient in third grade are more likely to graduate from high school. When you're not proficient, you're 4 times more likely to drop out. Students who are proficient are more likely to enter post-secondary programs and complete those programs. They have better physical health outcomes and better economic outcomes than those who are not proficient. And I think a really important point that we've been talking a lot about is, well, what happens to those students who are in third grade? And don't they just need a little bit more time to catch up? So we went back and looked at the cohorts of students over time in this state for those who were not proficient in third grade to see what actually does happen by the time they hit 8th grade. And in our last third grade cohort that had an 8th grade score in 2019, we had just about 55% of our students not proficient back in 2013-14. By 8th grade of that group, only 8% had ever reached proficiency. So what we are seeing is that if you are not proficient in third grade, it's not that you just need more time. It is significantly more likely that you really do never catch up. And we know what that means for the rest of their lives. And that's why it matters, because we're talking about 8 or 9-year-olds and we have to have a sense of urgency to do something and do something bold.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we don't see that exclusively in Tennessee. That is also backed up by lots and lots of research and evidence over years, the importance of that third grade milestone. So thank you for the context. So yes, let's now dig into the governor's bills that are going to be addressed in the legislative session. And I'll start with the first one, that's Senate Bill 7001. So we'll start with the 001. Mm-hmm. This is to do with student assessments during the pandemic, and it requires that the 3rd through 12th grade TCAP tests be administered as usual, but stipulates that those tests won't negatively impact student grades or teacher evaluations or school or district report cards. And that seems very flexible, reasonable. Would you just take a second and comment on the importance of continued visibility into student learning progress through these tests?
Sure. So I think that one of the things this bill does a few things. So one is for teachers and educators, it is a straight hold harmless unless it helps our teachers. We have a number of teachers for out-of-state licensure, tenure, et cetera, who need those scores, and a bunch of teachers who said, you know, I want I want my score no matter what. So we want to make sure that it's flexibility at the teacher level. But one of the things that is in the bill is a strong commitment to the assessment. And I think that, you know, we are at a point where the last assessment we had was really in 2019. If we don't have an assessment this year, then come next April, when I'm talking to everybody about how our kids are doing, that's going to be 3 years of a lack of data or insight into our statewide progress and growth. And so while we want to make sure that we are being flexible in how we think about assessment, it's really important to know how our students are doing so we know where to invest, what the impact has been, and frankly, how to have both ambitious and reasonable approaches to our education system. So the bill does say that there is an accountability hold harmless on things like letter grades, the negative consequences, but districts would have to reach 80% participation rate. That is down from the current federal requirement, which is 95%. So we would need a federal waiver. But we do think, given what we saw with fall testing this year, most of our districts did hit that middle 80% participation rate. That gives us a really good sense of how kids are doing. But frankly, and very critically, we have to know how our younger students are doing. You can imagine if we do not test this year, a third grader who tested in 2019, we literally would not know how they did until they got to middle school. And we just cannot, we can't have that. We have to be able to intervene earlier than that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And of course, our earliest learners in school, pre-K through second grade, don't take the TCAP test.
Right.
That starts in third grade. And this bill also speaks to sort of what happens to those earlier grade students. They are typically, the pre-K and K have an assessment called the portfolio assessment. That's something that is optional, and some school districts have alternatives that have been approved by the state board. But can you talk a little bit about that's not being required? Can you talk a little bit about how, with those early grades, what are some of the ways that we're going to be able to have visibility into their learning and their challenges and what we need to do to help support them?
Yeah, so another great question. So one of the things, and this is where I think you'll see the tie between all three of the bills that have been filed, but it is that idea that for summer programming and additional supports that will be necessary, we will need that information. And so districts have local benchmarks, local assessments that they are giving to measure progress of students over time. Those will be part of the eligibility for all of these additional supports. So we will have some line of sight into how our youngest learners are doing, but frankly and very candidly, right now, there isn't a requirement for that. And that's part of the challenge is everyone's using different tools, everyone's assessing in different ways. And so as a state, we don't have a good picture of what's happening with our youngest learners. And frankly, I think it's incredibly important that we do. I've got a kindergartner at home and a third grader. I want to make sure I know how my Abby is doing, but I want to know how all the Abbies are doing so that as we're investing, we can invest in a strategic way. So that's part of what you'll see in the literacy bill and certainly in the learning loss bill.
Great. That's a good segue into diving into the next bill, which is Senate Bill 7002. And this is really around the interventions to stop learning loss. And so this bill is full of terrific resources, a lot of them, and policies to support struggling K-8 students with a special emphasis on K-3rd, looks to me like. And so let's talk first about this part that includes new after-school learning mini camps, learning loss bridge camps, and summer learning camps beginning this summer. Tell us a bit about these. Will these be available in every district in the state? Who will run them? How are they paid for?
Yes, so I'm thrilled about this. We hear a lot from our districts that they want to provide more summer opportunities and extended learning opportunities, but there are some fiscal challenges to that. So this bill produces a few things. So this summer and next summer, so 21 and 22, it would provide for full day of summer school, what we're calling summer camps for K through 8. That would cover kind of the elementary school would be for 6 weeks. The middle school grades would be for 4 weeks, but it is full day camps. It also adds a second component, which is an after school camp. That's really to ensure that we are covering the same time period that you would see in a regular school day for working families. We want to make sure that it's something that all parents could participate in and not feel kind of those operational challenges that many of us do. For the regular school day camps, that requires 4 hours of some combination of reading and math, at least an hour in each, but up to 3 hours in one. It has an hour of RTI time, so that intervention time for students who need it. And then, I will say this was my addition, but I do have 3 very young children. So I said, you have to have an hour of play. It's still summer, and developmentally, they have to have recess and play. And we know that's important socially as well. So that's what you'll see in the regular camps. The after school camps are focused on STEAM. We want to make sure that students are still getting the arts and science that many have been missing, and we know have really strong connections to early literacy development as well. And it does have some language that those need to be reading based. There should be connections between storybooks and STEAM, but making sure students understand the power of reading as it connects to all sorts of subjects. So that's for K through 8 for the next 2 summers. For every summer after that, and I think this is where we're seeing some of that bold leadership that the General Assembly can certainly lead the country on, frankly, is saying that one of the hallmarks and legacies that we have learned about the pandemic or from the pandemic is that it has elevated and escalated the urgency for things that we know have already been kind of under the surface. It's brought them to light. And part of that is that we have students that have summer slide every year, and we talk about it every year. We talk about students who need more access to resources, whether it's an extended school year, but more minutes. This is saying that especially for our students in low-income communities, our students who are English learners, our students with disabilities, we want to make sure that they have those supports that will help them to continue to accelerate achievement. So for every summer after, starting in summer 23, it would provide for 4 weeks of summer school, summer camp, and then the after school camp. Now that starts in 4th grade and it goes for rising 4th graders to 8th graders. And that's to say for those students in that 3rd grade marker who really need that additional support, they have now 4 years of additional time to be able to support their learning. These would be done as grants. So we do think that there needs to be local control and flexibility on how they're implemented. And with all these bills, it's from the perspective of the student and the parent. So we are saying that every student who qualifies in the state should have access. The district can run a camp themselves through the grant. They can partner with other districts as a consortia, or they could certainly contract out to a nonprofit partner like a Boys and Girls Club or YMCA or something like that to run the camps. All of that is fine as long as they meet those minimum requirements.
That's great. And you mentioned all eligible students. So the program prioritizes students who, can you speak about that? Who's eligible and kind of how many students we think that is?
Yeah, so the program prioritizes students who are non-proficient. So there's kind of that priority eligibility. For our youngest learners, I think to your point, we don't necessarily have their proficiency. So from that perspective, we look at school-wide proficiency and say, we are assuming students in this school by 3rd grade are at this proficiency level. We can guess that that's probably going to benchmark down. And so K through 2 would have that same proficiency access same access based on their proficiency. So it looks at that first. It also looks at income and some other factors that make a student potentially higher risk for non-proficiency. But right now, from a fiscal note perspective, we have it budgeted at 44% of students statewide who would be able to participate, at least from a funding perspective. So if about half our students in the state K-8 were doing 4 to 6 weeks of additional school days or programming in the summer, that is a pretty astronomical number of kids. So we think that that's the right estimate. Districts can certainly use their federal stimulus dollars to expand the program for more students if they so chose.
That's great. That's terrific. And one of the things I saw that I was thrilled to see is that you guys are going to be providing free pre and post assessment tools for these camps so that we can really get an idea if they're working, and how effective they are. And I suppose hopefully can be used for continuous improvement, right?
That's right. And so we think, one of the things that all of these programs, and this has been a shift that we are making very aggressively in the department, is we have to not just measure the programs once they're done. We need to have those benchmarks throughout. So we'll have a pre-test and a post-test to measure growth within the summer. We will be reporting that publicly, and it will also drive some of the changes that we hope to make to continue to strengthen the programming itself.
That's awesome. Another exciting new resource on the way is the Tennessee Accelerated Literacy and Learning Corps.
Yes.
All about it, right? So can you tell us a little bit about this? How many will there be? How will they be selected and trained? How are they paid? How will parents and schools and partners get them?
Yes, that's happy to. And I should mention, and I forgot to mention, for the summer camps, we did set that minimum stipend for a teacher at $1,000 per week minimum. And that's how we budgeted. We want to make sure that we are providing teachers with that level of support. So I did forget to say that. For the tutoring core, we're calling it the all core, accelerated literacy and learning core. We're thrilled about that, frankly. So this is essentially, we're building out structures and systems to really identify what are those top either knowledge or skills that students need to know and master in each grade level, and then create a structure and system that's pretty robust for districts to be able to use, so they're not scrambling to try to figure out what to do. It also includes significant training for tutors, and the research we've seen, just bringing in someone who might have content expertise does not necessarily mean that they can be effective tutors. So all of that is part of the programming. The department, and this has to go through the obviously review in the General Assembly, is proposing to use a very significant amount of the $100 million that we were awarded in ESSER to create matching programs at the local level to expand tutoring. I would like to see kind of in that initial component, assuming that we do get approval for that, and certainly this legislation passes, that we would be able to see tens of thousands of folks who are participating in some way, shape, or form. But in its earliest component, we would be able to see 5,000 to 7,000 tutors, which would impact essentially 100 to 150,000 students in the state, broadly speaking. And so there's some really strong implications for this. Again, this legislation is to create the structure for that then allows the department to use our set aside funds to help matching funds with districts in their ESSER programming to do a statewide, really all call for the all core.
I got it. And that the ESSER that you're referring to, that refers to the federal legislation that has appropriated a bunch of money, a lot of money that is coming within a matter of days, maybe $1 billion, but the majority of that is going directly to districts. Is that right?
That's right. So the districts will receive across the state $990 million. Their plans for how they spend those are due March 1st. And the Department of Education at the federal level has said, look, you should be spending this, we hope, on facilities, deferred maintenance, air quality, things like that, or on learning loss. So the tutoring core is a really great opportunity for districts to leverage resources we will build and to provide students with small group, we call it high dose, low ratio supports.
Mm-hmm. Great, that's terrific. And this last piece of this bill, to me, it looks like the last major chunk of this bill is strengthening of the state's existing third grade reading retention law, basically saying that in the beginning of the 22-23 school year, a third grade student that's non-proficient in reading won't progress to fourth grade unless they meet certain additional conditions and take advantage of certain additional supports. Can you talk about what those supports are, what those conditions are, and how many third graders do you expect will be proficient by then?
Sure. So, I think that the biggest point is that this is 2 years. We wanted to make sure there was 2 years to start to recover from the pandemic, strengthen and allow districts to make decisions about how they would want to potentially staff and support in advance. Once we hit that 23 school year, what this would say is that students who are not proficient, and generically speaking, that's in the approaching bucket, and then in the below, that would be their category on the TCAP, so to speak. In that proficient, in that approaching bucket, and that's over 40% of our third graders, candidly. It is a large portion of students. They'd have a number of options. Right now, the law says they are retained unless they get additional supports, but it's really vague, and frankly, it's not funded. So this would say that they are retained, or they could retake a shorter version of the test to demonstrate proficiency, which the department would provide for free, or they could participate in summer programming, or they could participate in year-round tutoring through the all core. So it gives more, I think, not prescriptive, but very specific pathways to go down that ensures that students are actually getting more minutes and targeting support, and that at least half of those are funded by the state. For that below proficiency group, that's about 21% of our students right now are in that below proficiency. And of that group, what we've seen in the cohort is essentially none of them ever get to proficiency. If you look at that third grade, it is saying if you are not proficient in third grade TCAP ELA, you are not going to get to proficiency outside of some anomalies. So knowing the urgency there, students would be retained, or they could retake the test, or they would do summer programming and a year of tutoring, because they would need that level of intervention. And that's what we're seeing in terms of kind of that really strong tutoring in those very, very small groups over an extended period of time is what it takes to get those students to approaching and then eventually to proficiency.
Yeah, and that's obviously and I know this is just a start, and this can't be the be all end all, and the implementation is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and there are a lot of other supports we know that are going to be necessary to help those children be successful. But is there, I know that you have some focus within your department on whole child, and that you have acknowledged and recognized there are other supports that our children need in order to sort of be in school, healthy in school, safe in school, and ready to learn. I know that's not a part of this legislative package, but you want to just take a minute to speak to that and the importance of those other kinds of supports.
Yeah, I will. And I think, I think it'll also be important to talk about this in the context of the literacy bill and how we prepare new teachers as well. But, when we think about early readers, or we think about students in elementary school, what we have found and what the research is very clear on is that how we make connections and emotional connections to reading and learning actually does support our overall and eventual proficiency, and that's just developmentally what happens. And so we have to think about students who maybe have food insecurity, students who are experiencing trauma, students who are behind and are continuing to be more and more behind. There have to be additional supports to help those students. And that can look like everything from these amazing nutrition programs we have and strengthening that. We're doing a lot of trauma-informed supports for students, and that's been a big focus from the whole child perspective. And then our family resource centers, Taylor, who's leading that charge now and is just fantastic, really thinking about how do we bring parents and families in so that when we are thinking about really the whole child, it is the school's responsibility and the parents' responsibility for different parts of that. But all of that has to go into thinking about that individual student and all of the things that might impact his or her ability to read proficiently or be successful. And so that is a really strong part of our strategic plan. It is something I feel strongly about. And as a former elementary school principal, sometimes it was the make or break. The child, and I can think of a number of them, brilliant, academically brilliant, but there were other conditions and factors that impeded their progress and growth. We have to be able to address those within the responsibility of the school system.
Yeah, thank you for that. So on to the third major bill, Senate Bill 703. This is Building Better Readers with Phonics, is the nickname for this in some of the governor's press release information. I think it's going to be called the Tennessee Literacy Success Act. Obviously crucial. It ensures that all school districts use a phonics-based approach for kindergarten through third grade reading instruction, is my understanding. And this, we know that the phonics approach is overwhelmingly and unquestionably supported by decades of research. And so can you talk a little bit about that, maybe what does a phonics-based approach mean to those of us who aren't educators, and the importance of this to you and to the success of our third graders?
Absolutely. So if we're thinking about a phonics-based approach, and many of us learn to read this way, it's making sure that the sounds that we hear, that we're able to understand what those sounds are. And then we essentially produce that in writing, and the student is able to make that connection. So it's understanding letter names and letter sounds, what each of those sounds are, what they sound like when they're in blends together, and then how you make those blends into words, and then how you read those words fluently. And one of the things that we have seen is that there are a couple of approaches that folks have been taking to reading. And I think this is a great graph. So, and I'll break it down a little bit more. So that phonological awareness, we hear nursery rhymes. We don't hear as many anymore. And I wish we did, because it's so important that students can actually hear the difference between sounds. But translating those sounds to print is actually very, very difficult to do. And it's not natural. It's something that is produced by humans to be able to have that written print so that we can read. But we want to make sure that students are able to do that, and then that they can decode or read those words. And again, fluency is how well or how quickly we can read those words. If you look at struggling readers in older grades, it sounds like students who are reading in a very slow, stilted manner, like the dog is going to. They're not reading fluently or with expression. That means all that energy is going towards just being able to read the words, not understanding what those words mean in sentences. And so that really pushes on comprehension, and you see those lower comprehension rates. Why we think phonics is so important in the younger grades is because one, we want to make sure students can read those words and read them fluently. If they are over relying on picture clues or context clues to try to figure out meaning, they're not actually reading words. They're trying to essentially find clues to figure out what the passage is trying to say. We want to make sure they know what the words say and they can read them. So when you think about those students who they're just natural readers, whether it is phonics or whether it's just sitting in their parents' lap, they figure out how to read. That is a group of students. It's kind of, some medical professionals will call it the placebo effect. There's always going to be a group that just get it. But when you think about students with dyslexia, students who might, the letters come in different orders when they're making that translation between what they hear and what they're reading. Students with speech and language issues. My younger daughter has a speech and language issue, and so she really has to concentrate on sounds. Or students who just need a little bit more support to really figure out the science in their brain about how these sounds come together, and it's just like what I am hearing or saying in speech. That helps all students, not just students who struggle in reading. And so this is an approach that we think and know, frankly, from all of the research, is going to impact 100% of kids, where other strategies really target just a small subset. We have to make sure every single child is positively impacted in our reading approaches.
Yeah, that's great. And so as part of this bill, it's going to, am I correct in saying that it's going to basically require districts to use this approach K through third grade, and they submit a sort of their action plan for how they're going to do that. Is that right?
That's right. So it does say that we are a state that believes that we have to teach phonics, and that's how children should learn to read. And then it does say that districts have flexibility and autonomy in how they approach that work. But because there's flexibility and autonomy, then there must be transparency. So they have to develop reading plans that would then be posted online and approved by the department.
Got it. Great. And relatedly, then there is this part about the reading screener. And I think there's a math screener too, but a new reading screener that you guys are providing or that local districts can adopt on their own.
That's right. So this bill does require, I think to your point earlier, it does require a universal screener to be given or administered 3 times per year, the beginning, middle, and end of the school year. This aligns with a few things. So the RTI screener is required to do that anyway. So it's really making sure that we have that same kind of metered approach. But the universal screener here would be for literacy and for math. So that it could replace RTI screener. It would also serve as a dyslexia screener, and it could be used as an alternative to portfolios if a district wanted to do that. I think the idea is we want to limit assessment, but we want that assessment information to be good and comprehensive. And so that's what we would be developing as a state. It would be a free option for districts. They don't have to use the free one. They could choose to use their own as approved by the state board.
And so is this screener, is the Tennessee screener, Tennessee Universal Screener, is that still in development, or is that, and what's the process for developing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, I think, some initial requirements from early feedback about what folks would like to see in it. But we want to make sure if this bill passes, which I really hope it does, but if it passes, we want to make sure that any requirements listed in the bill are part of what would eventually be a competitive procurement. So we would take all of the things that are in the bill and then frankly look to superintendents, principals, and teachers and community members to say, what else do you think needs to be in this to make it robust and something you would want to adopt? That goes into a procurement, and it takes kind of 4 to 5 months to be able to move through that process.
That's great. And just, I know a lot of this obviously is naturally and understandably and rightfully focused on literacy, but I have read about, math is obviously very important as well, maybe equally, I don't know. But you're putting together a math diagnostic, a math screener as well?
Yes, so it will cover reading, writing, and math. So everything that will replace one screener. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. Okay, makes sense. Let's see. The last sort of component, and there are multiple parts of this, but of the bill, of this literacy bill, provides training and support for educators to teach phonics-based reading instruction. And it also sort of educators and kind of educators to be, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of with the educator prep programs. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, I think part of the bill and what makes this bill different is, I think from other legislation we've seen across the country in recent months, is that it is trying to take the comprehensive approach on the continuum of reading. And so what is happening in classrooms in terms of instruction, what are the district's plans, and then certainly how do we support providing data, information, et cetera, to families, because I think part of the bill does require families to get that report on their individual child's reading kind of proficiency at that time. So that's all super important. And then we also wanted to make sure on the front end that we were front loading some of that additional PD. So for new teachers, what this would mean is teachers in ed prep programs, they would, ed preps would be required to provide either courses or content that ensure that future teachers are given instruction in how to effectively teach children how to read using this phonics-based approach. That would then be paired with the licensure kind of supplement that would go with our licensure tests, because we know that's the accountability function for ed preps is you want to make sure your teachers pass it. So that's what you end up teaching them. So that would also be part of future licensure. That would be not a cost to the ed preps. The department would develop that assessment.
Yeah.
The second part is on existing teachers. It does say that, you know, our teachers have to earn what's called professional development points, or PDP, kind of professional development credits, to renew their license every year. The department would create a free asynchronous and synchronous version for teachers to be able to take to get professional development on this phonics-based approach, and that they would have to do that within the next couple of years to ensure that they are solidified in this approach and they have the supports necessary. Now that is separate from, this entire bill is separate from Reading 360, which of course is the $100 million investment that we're making as a department. A lot of those initial initiatives, big picture, are out there on our website, but we will certainly look and wait for this bill to see if it passes and what would be required, and match all of our supports for the leadership that is being shown in the General Assembly on this legislation.
That's great. And that reminds me that before I start to open it up for questions, I did want to just draw people's attention to the Reading 360 initiative, which is just a huge deal. And it has included just a bunch of work from your department, a bunch of really great work from your team members. Jonathan, would you put up that slide that shows the 8 component parts? And just, Commissioner, if there are some things that you would like to highlight that are a part of your Reading 360, this is the $100 million sort of initiative that was announced the other day, a week ago or so. All sort of 40 million in federal grants that you guys competed for and won, another 60 million that was sort of earlier COVID Relief Act funds. So lots of chock full treasure trove of good things in here. So anything you'd like to highlight particularly?
Yeah, I think so. So briefly, there's a lot of training and support and coaching for, you know, at the teacher level, but then implementation networks at the district level. Again, I think that the approach here is saying that we have to hit every single component of the literacy continuum. And so making sure districts and teachers, and really funding them to work together towards a successful implementation, not just kind of the knowledge building, but what do you do with that? A lot on Best for All Central. We're also going to be going through a process to make that more user-friendly, but tons of, I think, really rich resources. Our foundational skills curriculum and supports like that are there. And then a lot of additional supports for our ed preps grants to help them meet the requirements that may or may not be passed in the bill, so that we can ensure it's really strong content. And then for parents, I think that's what makes this unique, is we are saying that literacy is everybody's responsibility. So parents having grants to allow for tutoring for their children. We're doing at-home reading series with PBS. So parents will get decodables if they would like shipped to their home to be able to then read alongside a video on PBS to help their children read and to really be part of that process. And then there are going to be a ton of opportunities for partners and community members to do their part, building home libraries, building community libraries, giving maybe an hour off once a week for folks to go tutor in a school that needs it. Those are the types of kind of opportunities we'll be publicizing and hoping that everyone can be a big part of this solution. And I think a real movement in Tennessee. I think this is our moment in time. I think lots of folks are excited about what we can do to improve reading. And so I'm hoping that this initial investment with the relief grants, and I appreciate you saying we were the most awarded state in the country, is a really good launch off point, especially in partnership with any potential legislation.
That's great. I loved the Ready 4K app.
Yes.
Which is, can you describe that and how it's going to benefit parents and their children?
Yes, so I too get the text. So it is an app that parents and districts can sign up for. It gives you a couple of times per week a text to your phone, so that you don't have to go log in anywhere. You don't have to actually go into an app on your phone. You just get a text, and it'll give you a quick thing to do with your child. And it might be identify, the letter K and the sound it makes, and find all the things in your house or in your community that start with that letter, name, and sound. Again, making that connection. But it's a good reminder for the parent on some things they can do to build literacy strategies at home. We had the largest rollout in the country ever for Ready for K. 140,000 families have signed up, which is tremendous. And I think that just shows, the interest and the hunger for parents to do something with their children on this, and just want to be able to have the resources to help them to do that. So I am thrilled at the launch there.
Well, is there anything that I was talking with a member of your team a week or so ago, and just that opportunity, the importance, obviously, that we all know, everyone on this call certainly knows the importance of parent engagement, and you've referenced that, and that's why the 360. Are there things that you would like to ask communities, advocates, organizational leaders to do to help with parent engagement and to help connect them to these tools and resources?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that question. I think that, we will have a list on our website of all the different ways community organizations can engage, but best case scenario is that folks in communities can say, look, we are going to create something that is unique to our specific area of the state, and then take some of these ideas and start to make them their own, and then provide that feedback back so we can continue to build. But I think at-home libraries, we know, is critical. We know that students who see books in the home and have that visual connection see that is a translation for them, that's a priority, that reading is important, it's valued, et cetera. So that's something we're really going to be focusing on. I think the tutoring and being able to support in schools is going to be important. And frankly, awareness and advocacy is something that I think I have seen to be one of the great accelerants here. A lot of parents, because of the pandemic, are at home with their children. They're getting grade level texts that maybe their children are still struggling with. And it's enlightening, I think, some additional challenges that we're seeing in the system, which is building this advocacy community of our families as well as our schools. So all of those, I would say, get engaged. And like I said, those will continue to be built out on our website, but thrilled that so many people are going to be pushing for that in a way that is appropriate to their local contexts.
Great, thank you. Okay, we now have questions a number of questions coming in here from our attendees, and I'm gonna just start pulling a few of these that my team is sending to me. Let's see, we've got one question here. This goes to the summer programs and perhaps maybe also the aftercare programs. What are the requirements for attendance, and will meals and transportation be available as part of the programs?
Both great questions. So the requirements for attendance in summer programs, we are right now is 90% of days. That does not include 4th of July. I got that question the other day. So that remains a very important federal holiday. So it would require 90% attendance. It does allow for a capacity perspective that teachers would be able to split, especially for 6 weeks. We've seen that some teachers would pair up, maybe teach for 3 weeks, and then the next teacher would teach for the next 3 weeks to allow for summer breaks. But we are hoping for that full attendance. You can elect to participate in the summer programming or the mini camps. You don't have to do both. So that's just another clarification. For operations and some other components, what we have budgeted in our fiscal note is that $1,000 a week minimum for teachers, but then also supports for front office staff, instructional coaching and staff, bus drivers, and then certainly nutritional food workers. And then there's some additional overhead and operational costs. All schools will still be able to participate in Seamless Summer, so food will continue to be free for students who participate.
Got it. Okay, here's what has the assessment tool. I think this is referring to the assessment tool for the camps. Mm-hmm. Has the assessment tool been identified, and what about training to administer?
Yep. So we will go through a competitive procurement process so that we own the assessment and there's no cost to districts or the state. We will include district personnel in that to advise on content to make sure it's strong. And then training will be provided. We will likely do that in an asynchronous fashion. So that way anyone can have that training on demand. That will live in the Best for All Central website. But that I would expect in the coming months. If this bill passes, we'll be able to move quickly and within, of course, all the procurement guidelines outlined in the state.
Got it. Okay, great. Okay, here's a question. Can you explain how, can you explain how retaking the test helps, or retaking a shorter version of the test helps? And I think that means they're referring to the TCAP test in 3rd grade if a student is initially proficient.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. I think one of the things that was added as a result of, frankly, robust conversations is you have those students, and I hate this term, but I'm going to use it. It's those bubble kids. So they are just below proficiency. They might have been 1 or 2 questions off. They might have also taken the test in the earlier part of the window, and then had 4 or 5 weeks of instruction later that actually strengthened some of those results. And so there was a request, can you provide some additional flexibility for those students who are just about proficient, but need another opportunity to do so. And so that was to accommodate, I think, that request. Now, I will say, from the practitioner perspective, we all know that those students, whatever side of the line you're on, you're still right on that line. And so we would certainly encourage that districts continue to provide opportunities for students to still participate in summer programming, even if there isn't the opportunity or potentially requirement for retention. So that was the reason for the additional retake opportunity.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, let's see here. Here's one. Knowing where we are with the pandemic, all of us hoping and praying that for vaccinations to happen more rapidly than they are now. Will summer camps be available for distance and virtual learning students and families?
Yep. So that's a great question. Right now, the summer camps are structured to be in-person opportunities. I think that is a conversation that certainly the General Assembly will have. I know that in conversations I've been a part of, that is a priority. We remain as hopeful and optimistic as everybody else that on the timelines we're on, folks will have opportunities for that vaccination by the time we hit summer. But certainly, I think there is language to allow for us to make reasonable accommodations as students have concerns, or certainly their families have health concerns.
Great. And then here's a question. Let's see. Tennessee struggles with having certified teachers for the early grades, particularly pre-K. Will the early literacy phonics PD, professional development, available for all certified teachers, or be available for all certified teachers, or only those currently employed in a Tennessee school district?
That is a fantastic question, and I really appreciate that. So you will see in the bills themselves, it does focus on that K through 12 continuum. However, Reading 360 and the supports that go with that are pre-K. And so it is agnostic to a lot of things. It is saying if you are an adult who is responsible for teaching a child how to read, then you should have access to the professional development and supports, because it's about the child. And so you can imagine our pre-K teachers, whether that's in VPK or Head Start, our special education teachers, our ESL teachers, PE teachers, frankly, we want to make sure that there's wide and available access to anyone who would like to have opportunities. We're also putting the PD, our modules, et cetera, will all be free and online, so that folks who want to participate will be able to do so. We believe that if we are using state dollars to develop resources, we need to make sure that those are freely and publicly available.
That's great. Okay, how can informal institutions like children's museums who have established programs and funding around STEAM and literacy be involved in the early stages of development of some of these programs, especially summer programs and parent engagement efforts?
Great. So there are lots of ways that folks can get engaged. And so for the summer programming, I would say, especially for our districts, they are going to be looking for partners who can come in and either provide, frankly, be the deliverer of this after school programs, or certainly content during the day. People who might be able to come in and do specific, maybe it's like a week of experiments, but I would say think outside of the box and be creative about what could be possible for those who have the flexibility to do programming on site on school campuses. I know our districts are going to be looking for that additional support and capacity. I also think from just an opportunity to engage the community with resources that exist within their community, this is a really, really strong space for that. And so I would say get in touch with your districts. If this bill passes and the funding comes with it, what we will be doing is sending out information on here are the grant requirements. We will also post that publicly so that folks know exactly how they could fit into anything that might be funded at the school level.
Got it. Okay, here is another question. Shelby County Schools has identified the importance of literacy coaches in schools to help with providing support to teachers. Will there be funding for this type of support in Reading 360 or otherwise?
Great question. So Reading 360 really is about kind of universal comprehensive supports at a state level that districts can choose to participate in. So there are a number of district level grants that are called implementation grants. Those are grants that actually help and provide that literacy instructional coaching for schools within the district, as well as opportunities for teachers to participate in PD. So that is what Reading 360 does. Again, it's at the district level. Districts can opt and choose whatever parts they would like to participate in. For the literacy bills, it does not at this time include a reading coach for every school. That would be something that could potentially be added or certainly suggested when you speak with your local officials. But at this time, it does not include that particular component.
Okay, let's see. I have a question around, and I'm not sure I fully I might not be knowledgeable enough to ask this question properly, but there's a reference to LEAPS grant and funding in the bill that may be hard to nail down. Do we need to worry those funds could go elsewhere is the question.
Great. So I appreciate whoever asked that question. I know that that's something we will absolutely be talking about in fiscal review as well. So no, what this is a 30-second version of how this works. LEAPS is our after school grant that we get that is administered. What happens is we administer 13.5 million, and that's allocated for grants. Things that any additional funds that come in get put into this reserve pot that has been growing. So for the first couple of years of the summer school programming, it allows us to use the reserve pot that right now there isn't really any allowability for use. It just kind of sits there. For every year after that, we will maintain the existing funding for grant programming, but we'll also expand and extend the amount of dollars that can be used. And that's what will supplement additional after school programs.
Great. Mary, hope that answered your question. That was from Mary Graham with United Ways of Tennessee and the Tennessee After School Network.
Oh, hey, Mary.
Let's see here. Other questions? Let's see. I'm getting one. Let me see if there's anything else I'm missing. Any other questions? I think I have answered most of them. Jonathan, anything else that I'm missing? Lee, this is my team who's shooting me the questions. Well, we are coming up towards the end of our hour. Commissioner, before I kind of begin to wrap things up, and if there are any final questions that come in, I'll throw those in. But anything that we haven't covered today that is important to you that you'd like to say, any messages you'd like to get out?
Yeah, you know, I think that right now there's so much going on in education, and I don't want us as a community to lose sight of the moment in time. It is really an opportunity for us to say we are faced with incredible challenges, extraordinary challenges. Frankly, districts, teachers, community members, parents are doing an exceptional job at trying to get us through this year with the same growth and really pushing as they always do. And I think as a state, lots of other states in this country are looking at Tennessee because we've been first out with this special session and the leadership shown by the governor, certainly in the General Assembly, to say we've got to prioritize education, but specifically reading, which I think is incredibly important. And we have to make sure that we are doing that with enough time to get to students this summer and into next year. And so I think that the capacity and I think the symbolic representation that Tennessee has nationally is incredibly important, and I think something that folks are looking at. I also think that we are seeing a lot of energy and frankly very positive energy about what is possible if we invest the resources, if we develop high quality programming, and if we start to really say this is what it takes to move the needle in a very, very real way for students and their ability to have the futures that they want for themselves. And that means they have to read proficiently. It means we have to catch up on math, which has taken the bigger hit between the two as expected. And it does mean that we have to invest in our schools and our teachers and our families in a way that actually moves the needle in the way that we are suggesting that all of this programming could. So as much as folks want to be involved and can be involved, I encourage you to do so. This is not something that is a state initiative. This is something where the state has the opportunity to help facilitate, I think, those important conversations, that advocacy and that investment at the local level as well. And so it is going to take local schools and districts and their community members coming together and taking advantage of what is being offered at the state level and making it your own. And I think really accelerating literacy and mathematics from there.
Yeah, amen. Okay, there is one final question I missed.
Okay.
Before I wrap up, let me throw this one. Are the Building Better Readers through Phonics program and the Reading 360 initiative being pushed down to pre-K?
So those opportunities from the Reading 360 will be available to pre-K. And on the other side, they do go up into the middle school and high school space. So this is not just a K-2 initiative. It is pre-K through 12th grade, which I think is, I just wanted to make sure to note that. For the components around the Building Better Readers or the Accelerated Literacy Program, that does focus specifically on kindergarten, which is why for Reading 360, we have to get in front of it and make sure that we're providing all the same supports to our pre-K teachers in all the different settings those exist in the same way we are for our K through 12th grade teachers.
And the pre-K teachers, they would, my understanding is they would be able to take advantage of the PD courses, and they would be available for stipends and eligible for stipends. Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
That's great. Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions then. So with that, let me first just say, we are going to be TQE will be actively supporting the passage of this legislation during the special session. And we certainly encourage, our friends and colleagues on this call to do the same. We know many of our partners are already in process of supporting it as well. We know, of course, it is a start, and Commissioner, TQE is a birth to 8 focus, so birth to 3rd grade focus. And we know that while there is much that has to happen in the pre-K through 3rd grade years in school, there is so much prior to school, beginning at birth, that has to happen, that's important to brain development and child well-being and really readiness for kindergarten. So our legislative agenda will encompass things beyond this, important evidence-based initiatives and other types of supports and investments and policies that can promote the well-being and development of children earlier as well. But I just want to say how much we thank you for joining us today. I want to thank your terrific team for all of their good work. This has been a very, very difficult year, and appreciate all that you all have done. And the fact that you've put this momentous package together is really extraordinary, and I think a great opportunity for Tennessee children and for Tennessee, more broadly. We will be publishing this week our full legislative agenda, which we'll let folks know about. We also are going to be providing a link to this webinar that's going to be available on our website, and we'll be sharing that out via email and social media and the like. So if you all have not already, everyone, please make sure you're signed up to receive our emails, and that you follow us on social media. There's some information there. And if you would like information on how to engage with us on advocacy, please contact Lee Harrell. Lee's our VP of Advocacy, and his email is there on the screen. And I think with that, we are adjourned, as they say. We really appreciate you again for joining us, Commissioner Schwinn. Thank you everybody else on the call for joining us today. Have a safe and healthy week.